Hello, my name is Dr. Nina Seega. I'm a Research Strategy Director at the Centre for Sustainable Finance at the University of Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership, and it's my pleasure to speak to you today. Let me start by introducing CISL. Effectively, we are a department within the University of Cambridge, and we do some things that university departments do. Namely, we do research, but mostly on sustainability issues that are experienced by a variety of practitioners across the world. We also do education for postgraduates and executive education. But we also do some things which are quite untypical for university departments. Namely, we have an accelerator and we convene leadership groups. And within the Center for Sustainable Finance, we convene 3 leadership groups: the Banking Environment Initiative, the Investment Leaders Group, and ClimateWise, which is our group for insurers. Across those, we work with 50 global financial organizations to drive their journey to sustainable finance. And actually, one of these organizations, BNP Paribas, is supporting my talk with you today. We work with BNP within the Banking Environment Initiative, but also our education team has been supporting BNP and almost 200 of its business and sustainability leaders across all global functions in a long-term program to drive positive impact finance. But let's talk about what we're gathered here together around, namely sustainability risks. I like using the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report to understand the prevalence of sustainability risks within the business mind. And effectively, please don't try to read the slide, just look at the pretty colors. More specifically, look at the color green. So what you see here is the emergence of environmental source of risk across the business conscience. The top table is the last 13 years of top 5 global risks in terms of likelihood, and the bottom one in terms of impact. And you see that in 2020, all 5 of the global risks were, in terms of likelihood, were environmental, and 3 out of 5 in terms of impact were environmental as well. The fourth one, water crisis, is arguably also an environmental risk. So what do we do about them, and what kind of sustainability risks are there? A while back, when we were working with the G20 Green Finance Study Group, we put together these 2x4 matrix for them, talking through different environmental sources of financial risks. We split them into 2: physical source of risk, which incorporate climatic, geologic, and ecosystems, and transition source of risk, which talk to policy, technology, and sentiment. In terms of physical, climatic risks mean effectively what is happening. How does the change in climate and change in temperature drive increasing business, credit, market, or legal risks? One example of this would be, what does increased number of hot days do to retail sales? Another example is, how does the changing climate influence flood risks? And from that perspective, how does that filter into the mortgage portfolio, so in credit risks of banking institutions? There are geologic risks. There are also ecosystem risks, which is air pollution, biodiversity loss, land degradations, and other of this variety. This is a little bit more emerging in terms of the financial system. We're just starting to get a grip on them. And one example here would be, what would happen if the pollination decline impacted the prices of soft commodities? What would the market values of those soft commodities be? And how would that pollination decline then impact on the credit risk of agricultural firms? Now, if we talk about transition sources of risk, there are 3 main ones. Policy is the most well-known ones. Think about industrial policy, like the ban of selling petrol cars by a certain date, or financial policies and financial regulation, looking at climate stress testing. The one that is less spoken about, however, is the technology-based transition. Some work conducted by Cambridge University, Exeter, and Open University researchers quantified the stranded assets in the absence of any new climate policy to be somewhere between $6 and $12 trillion globally. And we're currently working to update those numbers. Another interesting source of transition risk is sentiment risk. And here you can look at investor sentiment or political sentiment. In terms of political sentiment, think about the switch of Germany from nuclear in the wake of the Fukushima disaster. Or in terms of investor sentiment, we've done a piece of work that looked at the switch in investor sentiment from a 2 and 3 degree trajectory towards a 4-degree trajectory, and what impact it had on investment portfolios. Now, the big question is, what do we do about them? And one of these is, for example, is regulatory expectations. So the Bank of England this summer, in its Dear CEO letter from July, had said that financial institutions need to have fully embedded their approaches to climate-related financial risks by the end of 2021. That's only 15 months away. On the other side, Hans Hugervost had said that if sustainability risks are already material, they should be reported within the financial statements. What's more, the Taskforce for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, this is the industry-wide task force, had effectively driven the incorporation of climate-related financial risks into the discussions around strategy, the discussions around risk management. And the question there is that the risk management is reported within the mainstream annual filings, as well as that scenario analysis is used to understand the impact of sustainability risks onto the strategy and the operations of businesses. So against those regulatory and industry expectations, what are banks actually doing and other financial institutions? We have done a piece of work with our Banking Environment Initiative, which tracked what banks can do to finance a net zero economy. It was based on 100 interviews with senior bankers and experts around the world. There were 4 things that we have spoken about. Number 1 is that banks would be looking to close the gap with green lending and investment products. So not only covering the large institutional clients and large caps, but also providing products to SMEs and individuals, looking from products without credit exposure towards products with credit exposure. Number 2, banks would be looking to create a shared vision with others. They would be working with their clients, potentially bringing in external experts to help them, to help transition those clients towards a net zero economy. Number 3, expanding coverage of the low carbon transition. What does that mean? Most financial institutions right now have exclusion policies and are financing renewables in some way, shape, or form. But what we're also looking at doing is expanding that coverage to cover the transition of hard-to-abate sectors, to finance the transition of agricultural practices, but also not only looking sectorally, but looking geographically, switching the focus from just focusing on the developed world, on Europe, for example, to looking into how do we finance the emerging markets. And last, but definitely not least, innovating in terms of incorporating externalities into financing. Now, across all of this presentation, we've been talking about sustainability risks and what the banking sector has been doing. But what does that mean for the treasury function? And effectively, there are 4 things that corporate treasurers can and should be doing. Number 1 is building knowledge and capacity, understanding what those risks are, as well as understanding what is the landscape of sustainable finance around them. Number 2, developing a sustainable finance framework for your own organization, looking what risks are there, but also what are the sustainable finance opportunities are there? How are they priced? Will they decrease your cost of financing? Number 3, valuing and managing assets responsibly in line with the UK transition to zero carbon world. And finally, number 4, not waiting until those questions come to you, but proactively engaging with financiers, peers, and regulators to drive the transition. Thank you very much for your attention. It's been my pleasure to speak to you, and I look forward, if you have any questions, please do send me an email, and I look forward to further conversations.